Hello and welcome. We are now live on Genealogy Quick Start. My name is Shamele Jordon and I am your host. How are you today? Did you know that cemeteries are probably like the most enjoyable thing that genealogists do? Do you enjoy cemeteries or do you find it creepy? I actually thought that, if you're not going to cemeteries, you're really not a genealogist, but I learned that's not true. But my family always enjoyed just milling around, looking at headstones, sharing stories, collectively forgetting where Uncle so and so was buried. Well, today our guest is going to let you know that there's a lot more going on those headstones than we knew before. You might have seen some interesting things on those headstones and not known what they are. Our special guest today is James R. Morgan III, and we actually might be cousins. We actually share a county, Barber County, Alabama. I know you guys are so sick of me talking about Alabama, but Alabama is cool. You know it is. And so our special guest, I love authors because I'm a book crazy person. I have some books to share with you right now. But let me just tell you, James also wrote a book. His book, he's the author of The Lost Empire, Freemasonry in the Old West. So he's going to tell you all about that today when he talks to you about his quick start, finding fraternal ancestors. You might not know this, but people were really into their fraternities. I grew up in a town that they wrote a little article. They said they had more organizations in this 1 square mile than in probably in the state of New Jersey. So people love their organizations. So before we get started, I want to share with you these books that every genealogist should have. Do you guys know about Researching the States? It's called NGS Research in the States series. And their goal is to have one for each state. And they don't have them for all of them, but they have a whole heap. And they have them digitally and paper. And so these are written for you, the family history researcher. And everyone gives you a history of that state, settlement, migration. Then it tells you all of the main archives, libraries, and societies that you should know about. And then it tells you the major resources, where you can find them in that particular state. So I have Pennsylvania, I have New Jersey, I have North Carolina. On my computer, I have so many other ones, but you should get them, and they're very reasonable, and they're written just for you, the genealogists. And they're called NGS Research in the States. Today, Jim's not going to join us. I'm so sad, but Michael will be here. Love Michael. And Michael is going to do pinpointing, changing census birth locations. The ancestors, 1 year, 1 decade, you're born here, the next they're born somewhere else. So he has a nice little technique on what you do about that. And there might be a reason. Your ancestors might not be lying. The census taker might be actually forcing your ancestors to lie. Did you know that? The census taker might be forcing your ancestor to lie. So Michael's going to talk to you about that, especially in 1950. Oh my goodness. 1950 census. Are you ready? Are you ready? If not, this one isn't 1950, but this is all about federal census records. Do you have this book? This is your guide to federal census records. Do you guys have this book? You must have this book because the most important record for genealogists is census. Your library has this. Go grab it. Go say, hey, I want this book. Every little nuance, little nook and cranny about the census records in this book. Get it. Another reference book that I think everyone should have on their shelf is this one. And I don't know, it's been a while. I know I haven't talked to you about this one in a while. It's Land and Property Research in the United States. I haven't met E. Wade, but E. Wade, you're my guy because this book is awesome. So everyone, I'm sure your library might have this too. They might not let you take it out, but this is another book that you should have on your genealogy bookshelf. All right. So those are some books. We have some great episodes coming up. I see you guys out there. Where are you? Tell me where you are. And of course, tell me about your genealogy groups. I'm going to rep my genealogy groups, AAGG in Philly. How you doing? And most recently, I think it might be up. I'm a member of the African American Historical and Genealogical Society in Chicago. Those are my peeps. Okay. So let us know your genealogy groups. And while we're doing that, we're going to bring my buddy on, Michael. It's me and Michael solo today. How you doing, Michael?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you, Shamele?
Are you having a hot flash, Michael? I
I
see
am
you
not.
getting with that
I
fan.
am. I am decidedly not having one. This is a little purchase I made on eBay about a week ago. There was a political discussion on Facebook, and I was smart. I backed right out of it, and I immediately went on eBay and spent a little more money than I should have. But that was better than having an argument forever. And one of the things that I bought that's already here. This is a funeral fan. Some of you may be familiar with these, and this. There we go. Was a funeral
Very
home that was
nice.
owned by a second cousin. It's not a funeral home for old people. That's the last name. It was a second cousin of my paternal grandmother, and quite a few funerals for relatives were held in that funeral home in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, probably. So it was a neat little acquisition.
Very cool. Have you brought stuff of ancestral value on eBay before?
Yeah, I tend to buy postcards to get pictures of places and locations. I did. I was so glad I backed out of that. This is an argument to stay off politics on Facebook. I found a picture of my great grandma's brother on eBay, and I in his World War I uniform, and that's on the
Wow.
way too. So
That's very nice.
looking really forward to that.
Have any of, oh, you said you haven't gotten it yet.
No, because that was one of the things I ordered when I went
Oh, when you was ignoring the
when
Facebook
I was
comments.
ignoring all that stuff. Yeah. So I'm looking, but it's been shipped, so maybe next time we'll have a picture of
Oh,
it.
I would love
Uh,
to see that. I would love to see that. Have any of you guys out there, have you bought any ancestral things from eBay or online like that? Let's see. Gary is on top again. Hey, Gary Franklin from Toledo. How are you? Angela Allen from Houston. Angela's been beating you, Gary. There we have Paula Moen. I miss seeing you, Paula. We got to get the band back together in Jersey. Denise Payne from Amsterdam. How are you? Hello, Sarah from Rockford. Bursley. How are you? Yes, Bursley is a wild chick. She is hilarious. I enjoy knowing her. Hey, Dr. Debbie. How are you? Dr. Debbie, you're supposed to be on the other side. We were supposed to talk. You're supposed to be on the other side. Hello, Benita Gibbs, repping those genealogy groups. How'd I leave them out? We have AAGHS from Chicago. We have Raleigh AAHGS. Oh, Chicago, Raleigh. We have, hi, Jody, new name, I think, from Niceville. Oh, Jody is nice. From Niceville and the Genealogical Society of Okaloosa County. Very cool. We have June Hall from Shaker Heights, Ohio. I just love saying Shaker Heights. It just feels cool. Marianne, how are you? Um, we're not leaving you out. Hey, Earl Weeks, my Philly Cam family. Hi, Wayne and Grace Ann from Magnolia down the street. Wanda Looney, one of my Alabama folks from Birmingham, African American Genealogy Group. And hey, Jenny, how are you? Very nice to see you. And rounding out, Stacy Dwyer from Dallas, Texas, DGS. It's so nice that so many people. I felt like that's a half hour.
yeah.
No, keep them coming, keep it coming. So, Michael, you guys have a really you and Jim, although he's not able to join us today, he's in retreat. Was he retreating from us?
I believe so. Yes, that's why.
Oh
Yeah, that's what
man.
I heard. That's what I heard.
So today you're going to talk about pinpointing changing census birth locations. So why are we even talking about this?
Well, birthplaces in the census can change, and there's two main reasons for that. One, your ancestor just gave inconsistent information, or different people provided the information, and
Oh.
that's a problem, which we're not going to discuss today. Not that it's not important, but that's not our focus today. Today is for those individuals that the political boundaries of where they were born change, sometimes once, sometimes 2, 3, 4 times. If there are certain parts of Germany, every 15 minutes the border changed in certain parts of the 8th to 19th century. So we're going to talk about that, some ways to deal with that. Those different locations can be frustrating, but in certain areas they can be clues, because they can help you pinpoint a little bit what part of the country the person might have lived in based on the different locations.
And you told me that, some things, there are other reasons that we'll probably get into why
Right.
the birth location might be askew. And it might not be your ancestor messing up.
That's
Right.
correct. We
Okay.
always assume the ancestor didn't know anything or couldn't understand, or the census taker was whatever, and that's not always the case.
Not always the case. There could be a reason for it. So let's get started with the quick start for pinpointing changing census birth locations. So step one is to create a table of census years and birthplaces. So why does this help?
Well, I'm a big fan of organizing. When things are inconsistent or seemingly inconsistent, to organize and make a chart. And so think about what years your ancestor would be enumerated. For the purposes of birthplace, if we're looking at what's given in a U.S. Census, we're going with 1850 and however long that person lived. So think about where they were at in those years. Find those enumerations, and one starting approach would be just to simply list what year and then what location they gave as their place of birth, to see if some of the issues that we're going to talk about apply. That can even be helpful for other individuals as well. But for people where the borders were changing or whatnot, that can be a good way to get started with the next few steps of the process. And organizing is never a bad idea.
Never, never, never. So we have our table. We kind of have the lay of the land, what's going on. So then we want to move on to step two, is to select a census year to start. Why are we selecting 1 year?
Well,
Decade.
because some of us really need to be focused. But aside from that, the instructions, the census enumerator had specific instructions they were supposed to follow in regards to everything in terms of our discussion right now, in terms of places of birth that they were to use. In certain years, there were certain regions they were to use as country regions, and other regions they were not. Or as a simple example, you would say you were born in 1850. England was as specific as you would get. You would not say, I'm from Suffolk or Norfolk or wherever. England, we don't want details. And in the enumeration instructions, it would say that, as specific as
So
the
after you
country.
selected a year, Michael loves to jump ahead.
Sorry.
And then you
I can't. Ironically, I can't follow directions. That's another slight issue. But
so you want to find these census instructions for that year. So go ahead and explain, like, census. Sometimes they wanted the specific geographic region, and sometimes they wanted the country. Like,
right,
what's going on?
for the place I'm thinking where this is the biggest problem is certain parts of Europe, where they would principalities and dukedoms and kingdoms and whatever changed over time, and in the instructions for a certain year, say 1860 or 1870, they might say these are the 15 places you can use. Do not use any other 15 places. And part of that, of course, that was before the computer era, but it's to make the data analysis easier if the place names are standardized. So it was kind of a jump start into that. But they can tally things easier if it's one of 15 places, not individual villages and things like that. It was just to standardize things.
Hey, my buddy Diane's here. Hey, Diane. I just put the link for everyone. Michael shared with me the link to the census instructions at census.gov. And so that's where they can go and get the census instructions. So did you say census instructions started in 1850? There's no instructions pre-1850?
There are instructions pre-1850, but since we're talking about places of birth and issues with that, we're focused on 1850 and afterwards. Because of course, if you use a lot of census work, before 1850, there's a lot of good things they didn't ask.
Yeah,
One
right.
detail of
The
which
birth.
is place of birth. Yeah.
Thank you.
But for any year, it's always good to look at the instructions, no matter
Yes.
what year it is.
Okay. So we read our census instructions. Did you want to talk about the 1950 census and their instructions on birth year?
Do you have that little image that we can pop up on the screen?
I actually don't.
Okay, we can talk about it.
Okay,
There's
good.
a um, I hate to use the word neat, but there's other words I want to use that we don't have censors here, so I have to self-censor.
I'm the booster.
There we go. There's the instructions on place of birth for the 1950 census. Um, the person's place of birth was where their parents were living at the time the child was born. So I've got a lot of people that lived in extreme western Illinois near the Iowa border, and many of them were born across the river in Iowa in the nearest hospital. And so my parents, for example, their place of birth was Iowa. But according to the 1950 census instructions, since their parents were Illinois residents at the time they were born, their place of birth in 1950 should be listed as Illinois and not Iowa. There's places in a lot of areas of New England, there'll be a similar situation where somebody might have been, right on the edge of the New Hampshire border and the hospital was across the state line. They were born in New Hampshire, but their parents were not New Hampshire residents. They'll put that state of residence as the state of birth, even if the physical birth took place in a different state. And, when we instruct people about where to, on your genealogy records, what to put as the place of birth, we always just hammer it home where the birth happened. We don't care where they were living and all that. And that's what you want to put in your genealogy database. But 1950 census, those instructions are going to be a little bit different. And some of you, it won't impact at all. Others of us, if I had not looked at the instructions, and when I get to where we can find that, I would have been really confused as to what everybody was thinking. So it's a good example of go to the instructions. That doesn't mean every census taker followed them, just like some people today can't follow instructions. But you got to go and see what was supposed to happen, keeping in mind sometimes it didn't.
It didn't. So step 4 is then you suggest to get a map of the location during that census year. So
yes, and if
1880, get a map that's from the 1880s. You don't have
right,
to get
exactly. I mean, it's
map, right?
exactly. It's going to be impossible to get them, an 1860 map of Germany or England or whatever for every census enumeration, but as close to the time period as you can. This one's from about 1883, I think. And if you can't get maps, you can do this. I think it's called learning about history or something. I think that's the phrase. That was supposed to be a joke. To understand, you might not find maps, but if you can read up on the history, like this area of Germany, it was part of Hanover, then it was part of Prussia, and then it became part of Germany proper in when that took place. So that impacts, they were born in the same village, but depending upon enumerations we're going to see, makes a difference on what they list as their place of birth based upon two things: what the instructions were to the census taker and what the current political lines were at the time they were giving the information, not the time they were born.
Right. So now let's move on to step 5. And that's my favorite step, by the way, step 4, getting the maps. I get stuck there on step 4. So step 5 is now to compare and analyze the map and the census. So you gave us like tons of cool census. Let me share the screen here. So who do we have here?
This is Christian. It's kind of hard to see that because there's all that notation on top of that. This is from Kansas, I believe. This is his 1900 enumeration, and that's the specific it was supposed to get. He was born in Germany. And then I think we've got some earlier ones for good old Christian. This is 1870, Saxe-Weimar, and then his wife was born in Hesse-Darmstadt. They married here. They weren't from the same place. And that's because that was in the instructions for 1870. Saxe-Weimar was what they were supposed to use
I've never even heard of Saxe-Weimar.
And then
What's
in
this one?
1860, now 1860 makes a
Baden?
Baden, and that makes a couple of good points. Um, we mentioned the importance of the instructions and the lines and knowing what changed over time. This is either, I'm not sure about Eliza because she's a cousin by marriage, but for Christopher, um, which is actually supposed to be Christian. Anyway, it's Baden, and where they were from 2 or 3 miles from the border with Baden.
Okay.
And so this is an example. Maybe his wife was giving it. You don't know who was giving the information, and he knew he was very near Baden. There's also the thing to think about when it's the same place for both of them. Who gave it? Did the census taker assume they were from the same place? And things of that sort. So for him in 1860, this is wrongo. But they lived in looking at the maps, they were extremely close to the border with Baden, where they were from in Germany.
Is this Ubi?
Ubi.
Ubi.
Yes, Ubi or Ubby. And he was born.
I like Ubby.
Ubby,
This is
yeah,
Ubby.
And he was born in Germany, 1835, I think. There, of course, that's in 1900 when Germany was the birthplace for all of these individuals. These are people that are from the north in an area called Ostfriesland, which we've mentioned before.
Oh, these are the Ostfriesians.
Yes, he's an Ostfriesian, and in this case, the census taker didn't want to mess with Ubi or Ubby, so he just put U. And there, the birthplace is Prussia, because that's going back 20 years earlier, and Prussia is that for the wife and most of the children. They're born before they cross the pond. To get away from the Germans for a minute, because Beidler's not here, so we can't, we're going to avoid Pennsylvania and Germany for a little bit. This is a guy that was born in Canada, F.
What's that F?
That means he flunked grade school. No, it means the French-speaking part of Canada is where it said he was from. Turns out he was actually from Ontario, but if that had been correct, it would have been a reference to Quebec. And also, since we mentioned the 1950 census and the instructions, there's an instruction for individuals born in Canada in the 1950 enumeration. If their first language was French, they are to be referenced as born in that part of Canada, even if they were not from Quebec.
Interesting. Why are they trying to make people being born from places that they're not being born from? It just is weird.
The 1950, I don't get. Maybe the Canadian thing was about tracking ethnicities. I'm thinking from a standpoint of analyzing data and that kind of stuff. But the birthplace thing, I'm not really sure about. This is a good example of people who don't follow directions. This is from 1880, and when you read the instructions for areas of Germany they were to use, Ostfriesland is not on the list. But this is my double great grandpa, John Ufkus, and he and his wife, it's kind of hard to read, but the intent there is Ostfriesland, which was not, it should have been Prussia or Germany at this point in time. That's what they should have put down. But they didn't consider themselves Germans, not going into that whole discussion.
Yeah, maybe he held a gun on the guy.
He probably just said,
on that paper.
Yeah, he probably just said, I'm not, and sometimes it goes back to the point of when things are a little bit off, there's a clue there. He felt strong about where he was from, so that's why he gave that information. So what we think are errors, quote, to keep in the context of this discussion, it could be there's the instructions that we don't understand that we need to take a look at. It could be the lines have been moving around, which they do, that we need to be aware of with your favorite thing, the maps. It could also be your ancestor just had some issues, and that's what he said. The one thing about locations we have in the United States, there's, of course, the obvious one where lines change with Virginia and West Virginia. That's another one where the lines did change as well.
Boundaries are important. That's why you got to hang out with Mr. Is his last name Hone?
Hone, yeah.
Yeah. And so then after you've compared it, you've analyzed, then you want to go ahead and document your findings.
Because you should write that up. If you got your dude or dudette born in what looks like 4 different places, but you've looked at the instructions, you've looked at the maths and done the things we've talked about and realized, oh, he was just following directions or following the lines, then write that up. So you know those are not inconsistent, because we have enough people who do give inconsistent information.
Yes. Yes.
You
And
know,
if you don't write it down, guess what? You're good. You're doomed to repeat all the research. And then you're going to
exactly.
say, didn't I just spend like a whole bunch of hours doing this? So document your
Right.
findings. Michael, that was great. Let's review the steps for pinpointing changing census birth locations. Step 1 is to create a table of census years and birthplaces. Step 2 is to select the census year. Step 3 is to find the census instructions for that year. We put the link for that in the chat. Step 4 is to locate a map of the birth location around that census time period. Step 5 is then to do a comparison and an analysis of the map and the various census records. Step 6 is then to document your findings. And so that was the quick start for census birth locations. I've been wondering about that because I really was messed up with all the German stuff. So thank you for that. All right. See you at the end.
I will see you. Peace out for now.
All right, let's get going with our second quick start. Give me 1 second. Did you guys enjoy that? Definitely. If you have questions for Michael, put them into the chat. Your partner is a Frisian. Oh no, Denise. Now I see what's going on. Just kidding. Just kidding. I never heard of Frisians until I started hanging out with Michael. Dean, stop all at multitasking. Actually, there's no such thing as multitasking, just so that you guys know. All right, let's get started with our next show. And welcome to our next episode. We have a fabulous special guest. I love authors. You know, if I could find an author to be on my show, I'm definitely excited about that. So let's bring on my possible cousin, James R. Morgan III. How are you?
Hey, Shamele. Hi, everybody on Genealogy Quick Start. I'm wonderful, and I'm broadcasting to you all live from Baltimore, Maryland.
All right, Morgan's at Morgan.
Yes, Morgan's at Morgan. I have the most confusing biography in the world. I'm originally from New Jersey.
Jersey. He's a Jersey
absolutely.
boy.
My ancestors are from Alabama. I live outside DC. I go to school in Baltimore, and I wrote a book about the Wild West. It makes no sense at all, but I'm here.
Do you have that book? Show that book. Let's see your book.
You know what? Actually, I don't have my copy with me, and I left it in the car.
Oh, well, we got a copy of it. So, James, we want to hear your genealogy origin story. How did you get started, and how did you know you were hooked?
Sure. So I'll be real quick. It was 2 parts. Initially, what happened was when I was 6 years old, my maternal grandfather down in Dothan, Alabama, he took me to see my family cemetery, where my family was buried at, as well as to Cherry Street African Methodist Episcopal Church. He sat me down on the steps of that church and informed me that my 3 times great grandfather built and pastored that church. That church is the oldest church in the city of Dothan and is considered the mother church for the AME denomination in that state. Really didn't think too much about that for many years. I just kind of kept it in the back of my mind until I was pursuing my undergraduate degree at Howard University, and I had a class with Dr. Charles Johnson, who's also a member of OGS, I would find out. And he gave us an assignment where we had to research our family history. At the time, I didn't think I came from anybody particularly special, except for that minister, Reverend W.J. Hightower, that my grandfather told me about all those years ago. I did enough to pass the assignment, but I wasn't satisfied, and I had more questions about this man, Reverend Hightower, and then that spread into researching other branches of my family. And so all these years later, here I am. Yeah.
Fantastic. I'm so thankful that's those Alabama kin. They make sure you know a little bit about something, right?
Exactly.
My grandma
and for the record, Reverend Hightower was originally born in Harbor County, Alabama, for the record.
Woohoo, Reverend Hightower. We're gonna have to check that out for sure.
We will.
I like Dothan. There's like definitely a vibe there, and I know that my people like came from that direction in some way. So I'm really excited about this quick start. Like I had shared, I'm researching a town in New Jersey, an African American town that is so heavily populated with fraternal organizations for the men, for the women. They had like a record. They probably could have been in Guinness. And so you're going to help me to be able to find out more about what was going on with your quick start, finding fraternal ancestors. So let's get started with step one, which is to learn about local organizations. So how do you get started with learning about local fraternal organizations in your area?
Well, the first thing I always recommend folks to do is check the newspapers. People don't realize that, especially when you go back, I would say pre-World War II, pre the Great Depression, fraternal organizations were very important. They provided not only a sense of socialization, but also some real world benefits, such as insurance. You know, you're talking about a time before workman's comp or what have you. And so the events, especially in small towns, as well as big cities, the events, the elections of new officers, the court cases, the issues that occurred in fraternal organizations oftentimes were big news in local towns. And you'd be surprised at how much content, how much history is listed in the newspapers. Many newspapers, in fact, actually had fraternal columns, as you'll see here, where they talk about who are the officers, what's going on in the local or the state level of different organizations. This what you see here on this particular slide is actually documenting a couple of things. We see there we're talking about a fraternal union, right? This is out of the Kansas City Sun, which was published in Kansas City, Missouri, where the Grand Master of the Masons, Nelson C. Cruz, he actually got all the other big black fraternal orders in that state to come together. And basically, what this is a non-compete agreement where they're saying, well, the Masons we will only offer, dental insurance, and the Knights of Pythias they'll offer vision, and the Grand United Order of Oddfellows will offer, workman's comp. Like, this is a non-compete agreement, basically.
I saw how they said in here about how they didn't want to, like, it's not all about draining people of money. It's all about, trying to benefit society. I love that. And I love how they said, and a delegation of ladies from the Grand Court, heroines of Jericho, Kansas jurisdiction, were accorded the courtesies of the meeting. Like, oh, we let them come. Excuse us. If they didn't come, they probably couldn't eat or nothing else. So
absolutely.
No, I love that. I love that. This is another one. This is my favorite article that you found. Tell us about this.
So again, I mean, it was very important at that time that people knew and understood who were the officers, especially when we had an election of various organizations. So here we can see that where it says AF and AM, that just means the Ancient Free and Accepted Masons of Missouri jurisdiction. That's what they were known as at the time. Today, the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Missouri. And here you can see the list of who were the officers from the Grand Master all the way on down. You can see.
So let's talk about this. Sure. Was it like we have AUGs, right? And then AUGs has chapters, and then you have like individual genealogy groups. Were there like national fraternals, and then just like ad hoc? Did churches have fraternals? Like, was it just everybody doing everything? What were some of the national fraternities?
Absolutely. For the record, when you're dealing with this type of scholarship, we call the period between the end of the Civil War and the Great Depression is actually known as the Golden Age of American fraternalism. Okay, and so to answer your question, you certainly had national and state level organizations. Probably your biggest ones, particularly in the African American community, are going to be the Prince Hall Masons and the Eastern Stars, the Grand United Order of Oddfellows, Knights of Pythias. You've got the United Brothers of Friendship and the Sisters of the Mysterious Ten. And that's something else that I would add as well. Whenever you start seeing a male organization, there's usually a female organization that's there or that comes soon after as well. You get into the Household of Ruth. right? Which
Yes,
is
the house on the roof. They
a
had that in Lawnside, and I think they were
absolutely.
one of the first ones there. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And another thing that's often great about these different things is that many times they did what I call musical chairs. So right here we can see.
Ah. Oh, go ahead.
Go,
Sorry.
go ahead, go back. Right here you can see the Masonic Lodge is there's two lodges here in this particular area: Roan Lodge 25, Liberty 37. Okay, you see the St. Stephen's chapter, which is the Royal Archmasons, and then you see the Knights Templar with Saint Matthew Commandery. All of those organizations are essentially under the same umbrella of Freemasonry. However,
Okay.
in there you see E.A. Walker Lodge 257, United Brothers of Friendship. That's a whole separate organization. But guess
Okay.
what? I'm willing to bet, and I am a betting man. You're going to find a lot of the same people in that
I was going to
organization.
ask you, did they join? Were they like members? Because, okay, wait a minute. So you said with that resolution, right? They all came
Mhm.
together and said, you're only going to offer healthcare, you're going to offer dental or whatever. So you had to join all of them to get your whole body and family covered, right?
Exactly, which is why the further back you go, when you start looking at some of our ancestors' obituaries, you go, well, wow, they were in all these different organizations and all these different things, and it sounds great. But there's an initiation side, a ritualistic side, a social side to it, but there's also some very practical benefits that
Yes.
people were receiving at this time, and particularly when we think about in the Black community coming out of slavery, what have you. How do you manage those type of because they still have those same needs that we have today, right? So
Yes.
how do
Yes.
you manage it? You manage it by every month, every week, you're paying your $2 dues, and when God forbid something does happen, whether it's anything from injury at work to the woman of the house being pregnant and not what have you. There's some monies there attached, and so what happens is you have a medical professional who is in network.
Ah.
Because you're in your network, you're getting a reduced rate than if you go to a doctor out of network. Have we heard these
Yeah.
phrases before? Now we understand that fraternalism as a whole, regardless of the racial background, that is actually the foundation of the American insurance industry today. And many
Love the
insurance companies originally were rooted as fraternal organizations.
Oh my gosh, so much amazing information. I knew he was going to turn it up in here, James. I knew he was going to turn it up. Let's move on to step. So you use the newspapers to learn
Mhm.
about the local organizations. So step 2 is to search the cemetery and family history for clues, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And another very real world benefit that we oftentimes don't think about today, many of us as genealogists do, but a lot of other folks don't, is one of the worst things that could happen to you for much of history is being buried in a pauper's grave, not having
Mm,
your final resting place marked or what
funeral
have you.
service.
And so
Yeah.
being a part of a fraternal organization and keeping your dues paid was a means of ensuring that you would have a headstone. When
And
I
a
joined my
proper burial.
I serve as grand historian for the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of DC. I thought, hey, I'm doing something different. I knew my grandfather was a Mason. My great grandfather, he was living, he was a Mason. I didn't think it went back any further than that. However, I learned different when I went back to that same cemetery as an adult with my
So let's
grandfather.
talk about looking at these cemeteries.
Absolutely.
So you have some great examples here.
Mhm.
So talk to us about who's this here and what are we
Well,
looking at in the cemetery?
certainly. So this is my great great grandfather, Porter Griffin, from on my mother's side. And the first time I went and saw his grave was in the summer of 2014. And I went and I had no clue at the time that he himself was a Prince Hall Mason, just as I am, right? And so when I went to his to the cemetery down there in Dothan, I was standing there with my grandfather when I took this photo, and I said, Granddad, I didn't know that he was a Mason. Wait a minute, this is my grandfather's grandfather. This is the man that raised him. And then he informed me that yes, he was, and that a lot of people in our family going back generations were involved. And so maybe it wasn't an accident that I not only joined the organization
Yeah,
but also
no
became
was
a historian, right? So it's
there are no
interesting.
accidents.
Exactly. And me being a genealogist and a historian, many people would look at this and just say, hey, he was a Mason. That's cool. Let's write it down. Me being me, I said, no, 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 no. Let's find the paper trail. But there was another surprise when I went there. If we go to the next slide, there's Grandma,
Woo!
his wife. She was a member of the Order of the Eastern Star as well, and which is the female counterpart, if you will, to a man's Masonic Lodge membership. So this is not only a male conversation that we're having now. Now we're understanding the female side of my family also being involved in fraternalism. Okay, and so again, I wanted to track down the documentation. So what I did was I was able to contact the grand historian
Hold
of.
on, hold on, hold on. Are you doing the Michael thing on me? You going on to the next step? All
Uh-oh,
right. So walk in those cemeteries, have a new eye, a whole new, what do you call it? Sense of looking for those markings that might mean something more beyond, birth, death. So after you do that, then you want to identify the organization. So you found those markings, you knew what they were because you were already in the game, right?
Absolutely.
Where is a good place for them to find what these is? There like a marking catalog or something like that?
Absolutely. And I apologize for going too fast. I just get so excited. But one thing that I recommend is on top of newspapers, there are actually a couple of fraternal symbology guides and dictionaries and encyclopedias, but they're particularly ones aimed at genealogists. I haven't seen one yet for aimed at African American genealogists, but maybe we should stay tuned and maybe you'll see.
I heard a little boop boop. I heard a mic drop.
Yeah. So, but there are guides that are that have been published, particularly aimed at genealogists.
So they can
as well.
Google symbology for fraternal
Right.
organizations. All right.
Absolutely.
And so once you kind of have a name, what you think they might have where they might have been members of, then you want to locate the records. So this is all the juicy part. So where
Absolutely.
do you get records of fraternal organizations?
Absolutely. So there's two avenues. The first question we have to figure out is, does the organization still exist, and is it still functional? If it is, then I always recommend contacting that organization. And sometimes, the local lodge or chapter, what have you, may not still be functional, but maybe on a state or national level, they may still be. So I would definitely recommend doing that research. If they do, contact them. Oftentimes, they will have a historian or somewhere where they may be archiving records, and sometimes they may have records and not have it cataloged or archived properly. And that, for me, that gets me excited, because I say, oh, great, I get to go and find all this stuff, information out.
Like
And
a pioneer.
Exactly. Get to be a kid in the candy store, so to speak. And oftentimes you'll be surprised at how welcoming that they will be, because they'll say, oh, you're interested. Yeah,
Archivists and librarians love to show their stuff. Just think about when you have cool stuff, you want people to come and look at it. They want us there.
Exactly. So
what are
that's
some of the big repositories that might be a good starting point? Like if you Google and you might not find, what might be a good overall place?
certainly. Well, I'm always gonna go first with Howard University's Moylan Spingarn Research Center.
Ooh, I love that.
I'm always gonna do my Howard.
Ooh, I just got chills when you said that.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am. I know the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of DC. We have our archives there, which if you need to if you wanted to research that organization in DC, you'd have to talk to their grand historian. That's me. Also, the Order of Woodmen, the African American Woodmen's Organization, all of their records are at Howard University, right?
Okay.
If you're in New York, the Schomburg Center for Research and
I just got chills again. The Schomburg.
Yes. The Schomburg has a lot of wonderful information, a lot of books, what have you. Let's see, if we're going to go down south to Louisiana, the Amistad Research Center. I mean, they have, again, a wealth. Did I mention
so let's
wealth?
look at some of
Of
these
information.
records.
Absolutely.
Let's look at some of these records. I think I have them here. Yeah. Let's see. There they are.
Certainly.
So what are we looking at here?
So this is the cover of the proceedings of the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Alabama for the year 1960. And so proceedings, they are literally reports of what was this organization doing over the past 365 days. And it has a lot of statistical information, finances, membership records, as well as death records. And here we see here, I was fortunate enough that the Grand Historian of Alabama, when I found out that my great-great-grandfather was a Mason in that state, and I knew when he died, here is a record of his, not only of his death, but also we can see, if we look under this this sheet here, claim number, right? Endowment and burial benefit. So grandfather Porter Griffin, at the time of his death, he had paid, he was up to date on his dues, and our family received a payout to assist with his burial. So
that's how much they pay today for Social Security.
See what I mean?
That's pretty cool. I love this. Okay. I know when I hung out at the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, they had an Italian fraternity, and they had all those papers. They had the applications. They had, like you said, when they pay their death benefits.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Oops. All right. So you gave us some really good places to look for those. Do any of you guys out there have any fraternal ancestors? Do you have any questions for James about locating records? Because that's probably the most important. Marion says hello to you, James.
Hi, Marion.
And Nadine said, Nadine, which town are you looking for Mason records? She said she wished that she could find some of those records in her town.
Oh yeah. Which state? What town?
Yeah, which state, Nadine? So James, let's go on to Emily. Hey, Emily, how you doing? Emily up there in Pittsburgh. She might be our cousin too, James. She's researching Barber County, and she wants to know how far back the books for the Montgomery, Alabama go back. Do you know the proceedings or where she might find it?
If you're talking about print for Freemasonry in Alabama, you're going back to about 1870, 1869, 1870. And those are very consistent up through 1913, which I have just about all of them. And so they're very, 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 very good records, as you'll continue to see.
Nadine's Wisconsin, Appleton, Wisconsin.
I've never really researched fraternal organizations in Wisconsin, so I couldn't answer that question. But I would love to see this. What I mean by being a pioneer, right? I would love to find out the answer to that now that you've asked. I've never had to research Wisconsin before, but maybe we can.
And I would check historical societies, because historical societies have that kind of niche stuff. Dean Henry asked, which archives in particular were you talking about at Howard?
Well, the Moreland Spingarn Research Center as a whole, but specifically I was referring to the archives of the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of DC, which I actually have the honor of managing, as well as he said no,
he didn't want to know about your archives, James. No, I'm just kidding. I'm coming to visit your archives. Do you take appointments now?
Please, by all means, please just let me know. Just let me know. Okay. And then also the wood. I know that they also have the Woodmen of the World, which the African American woodmen. They have and they have all of their everything. They have everything. Okay. Also. So
let's take a look.
Since we're on the subject of Howard, I will tell you this. I know for a fact that there is an archive that Howard has that is the news, what's the word I'm looking for? The periodicals of a number of Black fraternal organizations from across the country within the Charles H. Wesley collection. So anyone who knows about Charles H. Wesley, he was a pioneer.
Charles H. Wesley collection. You hear that, guys? You heard it here?
And he collected
that, and you got a lot of places. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was saying he collected newspapers of all the Black fraternal organizations across the country.
Fantastic. Love that. Love that. Love that. So let's move. That was step 4. Let's look. So you're going to locate the record. So you just gave us a lot of fantastic places to search. Let's take a look at the next step. Step 5 is to document and share your findings. And James, I didn't even push this step on James. Usually I say, you want to put this? James was like, we need to document and share. So talk to us about sharing.
Absolutely. So I'm a big believer in helping organizations, helping universities, historical societies, and even towns, municipalities to remember their history. I think that genealogy is great for us to know. It's great for us to share our families, but it's also great for us to share with our communities when appropriate. And so for me, this aspect of history is one that oftentimes gets ignored and forgotten about, but it really does help to give life and to the ancestors, to those communities, especially when you talk about marginalized communities, to show that this is the history that maybe the newspapers did or did not cover. Maybe the history books did or did
Did
not cover.
not. It's not did or did not cover.
Well, see, I was trying to be nice. But this is information that oftentimes has been ignored. And so once you find it, finding the names of some of these people who may have been sharecroppers or other things, like when you look at a census record, this person was a farmer, and that's the one thing we see on the line from 1870 to 1920 or whatever. But when you go into their fraternal life, it shows so many other things that they were involved in, to include maybe even their own words, maybe photographs, records of what they were doing with their money, right?
Yes.
You weren't going to get that on the census record. Thank God for the census, but you're not going to necessarily get that on the census all the time.
Yes. And I would definitely encourage, oh my God, I just had a picture. You think of them as a farmer, so you just think of them in the field toiling, but you don't think of them pulling events together, doing
Right.
social works, with coming together with other couples, having things for their children to come together.
Exactly. Or something as simple as having friends that aren't on the same page as them on the census.
Yeah.
A lot of times we assume that people are on the census together, they must have been friends, right? No, not necessarily. They live together, they live near each other, but their friends might be across the town. We don't necessarily know, right? We assume that oftentimes, but we don't necessarily know. If 100 years from now, people look at me on the census, I don't know anybody who lives in my apartment building.
Me either. I'm so embarrassed. I just
Right, I don't know my neighbor.
So yeah, I love this because it really puts your person in context as opposed to just being birth, death, and what the census record says. And so by and large, if you have African American ancestors or ancestors that were marginalized, they were probably in groups to socialize. And so you definitely want to add that part to their lives, to your research. So James, I love. Let me show the picture, your document, and share. I almost got past that. Sure. What is this? Talk to us about this wonderful picture.
So these are my 4 times great grandparents in the middle, Joseph and Jane McBride. They are actually the grandparents of Alma Townsend Griffin, who we saw on a previous slide. So now we're going back 2 more generations in my family. And this is a photo that has been handed down through our family through the generations. And I would come to find out that many of these people are actually were involved in fraternalism. This is kind of the root, if you will, of my family's fraternal story, although I didn't know it at the time. And so when we go, and by the way, grandfather Joseph was born into the chattel slavery, by the way, just for the record. But before he died, he owned a 160-acre farm, and he and his wife were leaders in the community. Now we're going a little further west. We're going to Troy, Alabama, in Pike County, Alabama.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And what's this?
So I was able to get this out of a history of the African-American Eastern Stars for Alabama. I found out that, as you can see here, highlighted, is talking about Arnold Chapter 340, which still exists. This chapter was established in 1914. And
by your McBrides.
Exactly. It was organized by Sister Sarah Arnold, Sister Janie McBride, and Brother Joe McBride. Now it's funny. I'm going to kind of backtrack on what I just said a little bit. Sarah Arnold actually was their next door neighbor. She actually is on the census next to them. But that doesn't necessarily, that's just what happenstance. I'm backtracking a little bit, but we can see here that in this one page gave me so much information. First of all, I had no idea that these ancestors were involved in fraternalism, let alone the same organization that I'm in 100 years later. But also, there's some really interesting information here. You'll see that I underlined the name of Callie Carter, right? Callie or Coley, that Carter was her married name. That's actually their daughter. That's Aunt Coley. She married a Carter. Okay. You'll see I highlighted the name of Leona Johnson, Leona McBride Johnson. That's also one of my great aunts. Oh, that's another one of their daughters. You'll see here that in 1914, when this chapter was established, Joe McBride served as the first worthy patron of this organization. And in 1960, a man named Lum Davenport, which was their son-in-law, another one of my great uncles, also served as a patron. So we're seeing not only the establishment of organizations, we're also seeing the family ties. There are other people in here I don't have time to list off, but who were members of our family as well by marriage or what have you. We're also seeing them taking positions of leadership. Okay, and we can research, and this is not breaking any type of oath or obligation that I may have or anyone would have, just to understand the dynamics of what does that mean in that town. And by the way, let me say this.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah, sure.
Fraternal organizations are secret societies. And so, who says they want you looking in their records?
Well, here's the thing. The information that we're talking about today, this is all information that is not secretive. The fact that the history is not secret. Now we're talking about ritual or stuff like that. That's something totally different. We wouldn't be having this conversation. When we're talking about the history of these organizations and when they were founded and who were members, that's not
open.
Secret. That's not secret at all. And matter of fact, this is one of the reasons why, going back to the beginning, headstones, things of that nature, is so important, because oftentimes our ancestors were so proud. I mean, can you imagine coming out of enslavement? Grandfather Joseph helped establish his Masonic Lodge and an Eastern Star chapter. And the building, not only do they still exist, the building is still there.
So James, listen, Gary wants to know, Knights of the Pythians of Missouri, where should he look for records?
Oh, man. You want the Knights of Pythians in Missouri? Let me tell you something.
Make it short. And then
this episode is go right on newspapers.com and check out the Kansas City Sun newspaper. And
you hear that, Gary Franklin? All right, let's do the steps. James, that was fantastic for finding fraternal ancestors. Step 1, learn about the local organizations. Use those newspapers. Step 2, search the cemetery headstones and family history for clues. Step 3, identify the organization. Step 4, locate the records. And James gave us fantastic locations for those records. Step 5 is then to document and share your findings so people don't have to find this out, so your family will now know. That was great. Let's bring Michael back. What was our question of the day? Our question of the day was,
why are we here? No, who was your
a mentor, and what did they tell you?
Yeah.
Who's going first? And we only have like 1 minute and a half. We each get 30 seconds.
I would just say my maternal grandfather, Gary Griffin, because he got me started in all this.
He got you started.
There was a local library in the town where I grew up who gave me a lot of, because I was 13, 12 years old, however old I was. And she gave me a lot of good advice. The one thing I remember, in addition to other things, was, don't you send somebody all those copies that you paid 15 cents a page for if they're not giving you some compensation. And she was doing that because I was a little kid and I was spending my allowance money on copies. And that's what in her defense, that's what she was worried about, that all my allowance was going to photocopies.
Somebody was pimping you out.
Yeah, she was worried about, bless her heart, she was worried about that, and gave me a lot of good research advice too, on top of that.
Oh, that's cool. So you and Jim were like, Jim and Michael, and I think Jonathan were like kid genealogists. So mine, of course, my cousin Floyd. And one of the most important things he told me was, organize your stuff now, because you're just going to be grabbing, and you're going to come to a day when you're going to be paying money for stuff that you already have. So if you guys want to know how to organize your stuff, let me know, because I can help you out. So that is our quick start for today. Guys, thank you so much out there. Thank you for joining us. You made this show lots of fun. James, fantastic.
Very good. Very good.
Great luck on your book sales. Thank you for being here. And thanks everyone for joining us.
Thanks, guys.
Bye. Don't go anywhere, James.